this control of the coast using cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. That is potentially more difficult to deal with, and really depends on the risk-reward calculus both for the Houthis in Yemen and, more importantly, for because they are a proxy force of Iran, what is Iran's calculation within this? If you are going to take military action, can we? Of course, is yes, we can. Should we and must we? Must we our political actions? Can we our political actions? Can we as a military action? And then the calculation is this just a strike to try and affect deterrence by punishment, or are you going to have a longer campaign to destroy a significant proportion of capability?
The British military is drawing up plans with the US for potential airstrikes against Yemen's Houthi rebels following their attacks on commercial ships in the Red Sea. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has warned that if the Houthis continue to threaten lives and trade, the UK will not hesitate to take action. Joining me now is General Chip Chapman, a former senior British military advisor. Chip, Happy New Year and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jane.
Chip, just give us a bit of context first. Can you explain first why the Houthis are attacking shipping in the Red Sea and I guess what they hope to gain by it?
Well, the Houthis have always been part of the axis of resistance, mainly the Shia forces. It's from Iran's perspective, it is part of the unity of fronts, and the Houthis are part of this ring of fire. We've already seen, for example, exo-atmospheric interceptions of ballistic missiles by the Israelis, which were headed towards Eilat. And part of the sort of grander strategic thing is to try and strangle the Israeli economy by stopping shipping, really. And the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, Bab el-Mandeb is one of the key shipping lanes to keep open. So the Houthis don't actually run Yemen. There's been a civil war there since 2014. Saudi Arabia and the UAE intervened in 2015 in a thing called Operation Decisive Storm, which wasn't decisive and wasn't a storm. And the Houthis essentially control the area towards the coast. And what they're trying to do is what we call A2AD, that is anti-access area denial, to stop the shipping coming down there. That will raise the costs, and that might provide leverage to try and get the Israelis to stop. They won't, because they conceive this to be an existential threat to them.
Chip, so you said obviously that it's a very, very important shipping route. From what I understand, the Red Sea and the Suez Canal account for about 30% of the world's shipping, which is massive. So this is likely, if it goes on, to have a very big impact on international shipping, right?
Well, they'll be rerouted. It's just the cost. You've got a 3,000-mile extra route to go down. It will have more impact potentially on Egypt, as $10 billion worth of trade flows through the Suez Canal. They can't afford that because they've got a great debt burden at the moment. Now, they're partly in a sort of a negotiation with Qatar and US to try and get a ceasefire in the future. That might be a catalyst and leverage for them to try and get a ceasefire in the future. And also is leverage for them to potentially be one of the options to take over the governance of Gaza. I'm not saying that will happen, but it's certainly one of the options.
Now, we've seen attacks on shipping in the past. I'm thinking of Somali pirates who would regularly target shipping maybe a decade ago, taking lots of hostages. Why is this situation different?
Well, if you look at the attack yesterday, it's different for this reason. Yesterday, we saw a small boat swarm on the Maersk Hangzhou. A small boat swarm is the equivalent of what happened on the Somali coastline with the pirates taking ships for hostage, essentially. That's easy to deal with, and I think that will already be deterred by the actions of the US Navy yesterday in destroying 3 of the 4 ships. The 4th ship actually going back, or skiff going back, is a good way for them to say, don't go out there, you're going to get obliterated. That is completely different than this control of the coast using cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. That is potentially more difficult to deal with, and really depends on the risk-reward calculus both for the Houthis in Yemen and, more importantly, for because they are a proxy force of Iran, what is Iran's calculation within this? If you are going to take military action, can we? Of course, is yes, we can. Should we and must we our political actions? Can we as our political actions? Can we as a military action? And then the calculation is this just a strike to try and affect deterrence by punishment, or are you going to have a longer campaign to destroy a significant proportion of capability? Now, we don't know what the left and right of arc of that is. Now, at the moment, the signalling from both the joint statement from the UK and US is telling the Houthis to desist in targeting ships. You've got a trade-off here between what General Frank McKenzie, who was the previous CENTCOM commander, said. Sometimes you've got to throw a pitch. You can't catch it eternally, because eventually you're going to take a significant escalatory event on a ship. So you can knock down most of the Houthi ballistic missiles and drones. If one got through and were, God forbid, to sink Type 45 destroyer from the UK or a US ship, that would get towards the point of being determined to be an act of war. So there are problems in how you approach this in an escalatory framework.
Right. So, I mean, there is, as you're saying, this risk that targeting the Houthis' missile launch sites might escalate the current crisis in the Middle East. But presumably there are also enormous risks of not intervening here.
Well, there are, because it's the message that you send to other malign actors, potentially the Chinese, that you can close major trade routes. Now, you've got a tension between some of the vital interests here of both the UK and the US. So, of course, one of the vital interests is always to keep sea lanes open, but it's also to deter regional war, and it's also to avoid Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You've already got a conflict between those things already. And the other one, which is in conflict here, is to prevent nuclear proliferation. That is something that Iran could also get involved in. And the calculus there, the risk-reward calculus I talked about, is even greater from either the responses of the US or Israel or non-responses. You really want a non-response, but it's this trade-off between, can you deter them by words? Do you have to take military action? Now, it's worth saying that since Operation Prosperity Guardian started, which was about 10 days ago, 1,200 ships have had transit through the area since that was announced. So at the moment, it's a sort of highway patrol safe passage. So I wouldn't read too much into the skiff attacks yesterday. It's whether some of those 1,200 ships and those which follow in the future are targeted and some of those missiles get through and to start destroying those ships.
Yeah, Chip, thank you so much for your insights. I really appreciate it today. That's General Chip Chapman, former senior British military advisor.